In September 2010, a heartbreaking tragedy unfolded in the waters of Hong Kong. An intellectual couple from Guangzhou boarded a luxury cruise ship, expecting a wonderful vacation. However, the unthinkable happened when the wife mysteriously disappeared at sea the following morning. At Hong Kong's Victoria Harbour, the safari pier bustled with women in black uniforms. These weren't ordinary cruise staff, but professional recruiters for gambling cruise ships. These vessels would take passengers into international waters, beyond the reach of law enforcement, to operate floating casinos. Their primary targets were tourists from mainland China. Among the passengers boarding these ships was a particularly notable individual, Weilie, a senior research officer at the Guangzhou Policy Commission. Unlike typical guests seeking their fortune at the gambling tables, Weilie carried a darker, more sinister intention. Gambling was merely a pretext. His true purpose was a brutal crime he had methodically planned in advance. On September 21st, 2010, during the National Day and Mid-Autumn Festival holiday, Weilie and his wife Yang Wenquan traveled from Guangzhou to Hong Kong. On the afternoon of September 23rd, they purchased 2 tickets for the Macau Success, one of the well-known gambling ships that regularly anchored in international waters off Hong Kong's coast. The Macau Success was a 10,000-ton vessel, 8 stories tall with 224 rooms and a capacity for 500 passengers. The bottom 3 decks housed the crew quarters. The 4th and 5th decks contained guest rooms. The 6th deck featured the casino and restaurant. The 7th deck was an open space with VIP rooms, saunas, and karaoke, and the 8th deck housed the bridge. The 7th deck was typically the quietest as most passengers congregated in the casino. At dawn, around 6 a.m., a Burmese crew member working on the 7th deck happened upon a couple in conversation. When he passed by again later, he saw them seated on the deck, with the man sitting on the left, his right hand resting gently on the woman's shoulder, in what appeared to be an intimate moment. However, just an hour later, around 7 a.m., a female tourist named Liu from Guangdong witnessed a far more horrifying scene. When she stepped onto the deck for some fresh air, she saw the woman slumped over, her body leaning against the railing as if unconscious. More frightening still, the man's demeanor had changed dramatically. He was now forcefully gripping the woman's head and shoulders, violently pulling her toward the railing. Security personnel rushed to the 7th deck after receiving the report, but the woman had vanished, leaving only the man standing there in a state of panic. Bloodstains covered the deck, with impact marks on the railing and blood on the man's hands, even under his fingernails. Due to lack of jurisdiction, security could only watch helplessly as the man returned to his room, claiming stomach pain. The ship's management immediately contacted the police, who identified the couple. The man was Weilie, 47, and the missing woman was his wife, Wenquan. Within an hour of receiving the report, Hong Kong Maritime Police found the victim's body amid the vast waves. The autopsy revealed horrifying details about what had transpired on deck that morning. The victim's head showed no fewer than 10 bruises of varying severity, a cracked skull, and swelling in the temporal region. One arm was broken, and her wrists bore marks of being forcefully gripped, all consistent with signs of a savage beating using fists or a hard object. Most heartbreaking was the discovery that Wenquan was still alive and breathing when thrown overboard. Ultimately, it was the cold ocean waters that claimed the life of this unfortunate woman. News of Wenquan's death only reached Guangzhou University after the National Day holiday. However, her close friends had already sensed something was wrong. Another woman who had been traveling with the couple in Hong Kong had returned to Guangzhou a day earlier. The next day, she couldn't reach Wenquan and only learned of her friend's death when the police made their announcement. Although police hadn't yet released the cause of Wenquan's death, her close friends harbored dark suspicions. They believed this was no random accident but a premeditated murder. This belief was strengthened when they recalled Wenquan's anxious confessions. She had once said that if she ever truly left Weilie, her fate might mirror that of his sister. This wasn't just spoken, it was recorded in her diary. The story of Weilie's only sister made people shudder. She had worked at a local television station before immigrating to Australia in 2000. However, shortly after arriving in Australia, she was kidnapped and murdered under mysterious circumstances. To this day, the case remains unsolved. But one detail raised questions. During interrogation, Weilie claimed his sister's kidnapper was a gambler. How did he know this when the case was still unsolved? And why did Wenquan sense she would share her sister-in-law's fate if she left Weilie? According to friends, Wenquan always tried to maintain the image of a happy family in public, but reality was far from idyllic. The couple had divorced in 2008, though even her own siblings only learned of this after the murder. They hadn't separated after the divorce, but continued living together to care for their child. Wenquan was born in 1967 in Changchun, Jilin Province. From childhood, she was outgoing, lively, and dynamic. After completing her master's degree in 1994, she became a history lecturer at Guangzhou Normal Institute, later merged into Guangzhou University. She devoted 10 years to teaching, unconcerned with fame or fortune. In daily life, Wenquan enjoyed shopping, watching movies, and singing karaoke with colleagues, always bringing laughter and joy to those around her. Students adored her, as few history teachers were as energetic and open as she was. In stark contrast to Wenquan's optimistic nature, Weilie was reserved and withdrawn. 3 years her senior and a Guangzhou native, he was a different person entirely. At work, Weilie remained focused on his tasks, rarely engaging in conversation. Neighbors had little impression of him as he always walked with his head down, avoiding greetings, emanating a gloomy, lifeless demeanor. He had few friends outside of work. However, according to neighbors, about 2 years before the tragic incident, they noticed an unusual change in his routine. Every morning at 6 a.m., like clockwork, Weilie would appear in the park for meditation and martial arts practice. This routine lasted exactly 1 hour, after which he would return home at 7 a.m., maintaining his characteristic somber expression. In 1999, through a matchmaker's introduction, Wenquan and Weilie married. They later had a son. From the outside, they appeared to be the perfect family that many envied. The husband was a high-ranking official, the wife a prestigious university lecturer, and their son was well-behaved and understanding. They painted a picture of an intellectual, happy, and fulfilled family. However, behind this seemingly perfect facade lay increasingly deep cracks that became irreparable. Beyond the personality differences between the vibrant, life-loving wife and the quiet, reserved husband, what drove this marriage to its breaking point was Weilie's extreme miserliness. His obsession with money exceeded normal human tolerance, becoming a haunting presence in the family's daily life. In reality, they were quite well off, owning 3 apartments in Guangzhou with savings amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. However, Weilie controlled all assets, including his wife's salary. In 2008, they signed divorce papers, and Wenquan received 1 apartment under the condition that she would not remarry. Colleagues and friends all knew of Weilie's irritating penny-pinching ways. They recalled that during the summer break before the murder, when Wenquan took students on a field trip to Xi'an and brought their son along, Weilie unexpectedly took time off work to join them. During their mountain climb, Wenquan bought a cable car ticket for a colleague, and Weilie repeatedly questioned whether she had been reimbursed. Later, when it came time to buy a 20 yuan, about $3 bus ticket, he made an excuse about using the restroom and disappeared entirely. This trip shocked Wenquan's friends, who couldn't believe someone could be so calculating over such small amounts. More tellingly, after his arrest, with no relatives remaining in Guangzhou, Weilie wrote to Wenquan's sister. Rather than inquiring about his 10-year-old son who had just lost his mother, he reminded them to collect the rent money. The extent of Weilie's miserliness had become unbearable, ultimately driving Wenquan to seek divorce. However, sometime after the divorce, when Wenquan's life hadn't quite stabilized, she began to waver. Weilie had proposed remarriage, and shortly before the incident, Wenquan told friends she sensed changes in him and perhaps still hoped to maintain an intact family. These changes included, first, this notoriously frugal man suddenly flew to Xi'an to vacation with his ex-wife and had previously taken her to Fujian. Before National Day, he proposed a trip to Hong Kong, supposedly to visit his 80-year-old uncle. When Wen Quan hesitated to get her travel documents, he became angry and insisted they must go to Hong Kong during this holiday. It seemed unbelievable that a normally miserly man would willingly spend money to travel everywhere with his ex-wife. This led Wen Quan to seriously consider remarriage. However, after the murder, her friends realized that behind these unusual actions might not have been an attempt to reconcile, but rather a long-planned scheme. Especially during the Huashan tour, Weilie, who was very stingy, took the initiative to invite everyone to a meal before going up the mountain, which made Wen Quan very happy. On the way down the mountain, for fear of missing the flight, Wen Quan offered to go down the mountain first to get the luggage, so that Weilie could take his son more slowly. But unexpectedly, not only did he not take care of his son, he also silently chased after his wife without saying a word. Coupled with his insistence on going to Hong Kong, people speculated that he was probably looking for a suitable opportunity to murder his ex-wife. If there were no witnesses on the train, this case would have become an unsolved mystery. After his arrest, Weilie underwent preliminary questioning by Hong Kong police, but his testimony was highly dubious. He claimed Wen Quan had ended everything by hitting her head against the ship's railing due to massive gambling losses. When he discovered she wasn't breathing, remembering her wish to be buried at sea, he pushed her overboard, claiming they chose the gambling ship because of her gambling addiction. However, surveillance camera footage from that night showed they never set foot in the casino on the 6th deck, immediately discrediting his testimony. Although Wen Quan was studying for a doctorate at Jinan University, it was only a part-time course, and her thesis was almost completed, so there was no great pressure. Moreover, if she was addicted to gambling, how could she not go to the casino all night? And Wen Quan was a lively and energetic woman, so how could she leave her 10-year-old son behind to do something foolish? The case went to trial at the Hong Kong High Court in late September 2010, lasting over 2 weeks. During the trial, perhaps realizing his testimony wasn't convincing, Weilie offered a different explanation. The court had to change the jury and review the case to ensure justice. The prosecution and defense argued intensely over whether Wen Quan might have taken her own life. Weilie eventually made some concessions. He testified that his wife often needed consolation due to her doctoral studies pressure, and he even suspected her of infidelity, leading to frequent arguments. He said that once around 1 or 2 in the morning, Wen Quan woke him up to tell him about it while he was sleeping soundly, so he was very upset and objected to her actions. In protest against her husband's attitude, Wen Quan got angry and beat him. Finally, he couldn't control himself and slapped her back. That same night, Wen Quan proposed a divorce, but thinking of her aging mother-in-law and young son, they secretly divorced in 2008. However, 3 months later, they reconciled but did not re-register their marriage. On September 23rd, on the gambling ship, Wen Quan quarreled with Weilie again because he suspected him of having an affair and asked for an immediate remarriage. After Weilie refused, Wen Quan then asked Weilie to lend his niece 400,000 yuan, approximately $60,000, to open a store, but was also refused. The two got into another argument and went back to their rooms. The next morning, Weilie followed his ex-wife to the 7th floor deck and saw her about to climb over the railing and jump into the sea, so he pulled her back. This pulling and pushing action was repeated 7 times, each time his fist and Wen Quan's head hit the deck. Weilie then saw that Wen Quan had stopped breathing and her pupils were dilated, thinking that she was dead. In a panic, afraid of being held responsible and worried about his son's future, he pushed his wife through the gap in the railing into the sea. The court ultimately did not accept Weilie's contradictory and questionable testimony. On November 10th, 2001, the jury found Weilie guilty of murder and sentenced him to life in prison. On September 15th, 2014, after serving 3 years, Weilie asked the court to allow him to appeal to a higher court, but the judge immediately rejected it. Because Weilie did not plead guilty, his motive for committing the crime remains a mystery. However, when thinking about Weilie's greed, stinginess, and selfishness, Wen Quan's friends believed that money was the reason why he attacked his ex-wife. In the divorce agreement, there was a section stating that the house would belong to Wen Quan, but because she was subjective and did not take precautions, She did not complete the transfer procedure, so the house was still under Weilie's name. Half a year before the incident, Wenquan intended to buy a new apartment and wanted to sell the house he was living in, so she decided to transfer the ownership right after the National Day holiday. If everything went smoothly, the house would completely belong to Wenquan. Perhaps for a money-grubbing person like Weilie, wouldn't this be unacceptable? Normally, people born into a well-off family like Weilie would never be so stingy and calculating. In the end, Weilie did not hesitate to take action against the wife who had shared a bed with him and taken care of him for so many years. He himself also had to receive the heaviest sentence under Hong Kong law. The minimum sentence reduction period was 25 years. The price Weilie had to pay was extremely appropriate when he valued money more than human life. Next is a case about a model business couple who couldn't escape the crisis of their midlife marriage. The husband had an affair with his secretary and was harboring thoughts of killing his wife. In 2018, a murder case shocked the entire country. The killer was the CEO of a listed company worth billions of dollars. Why would someone of his status attack his former life partner, willingly destroying his own future? The man who brutally attacked his wife was Guan Yanbin, born in 1954. He was the founder, chairman of the board, and CEO of a renowned pharmaceutical company at the time. At 18, he joined the military and served until age 23, after which he worked at the 2nd Industrial Bureau in Wuchang, Heilongjiang Province. Just 2 years later, he became the Youth League secretary, opening up a promising future. However, when the winds of reform swept across China, he boldly resigned from his stable position to enter the business world. In 1979, he gained attention by reviving a brick factory on the verge of bankruptcy. Instead of returning to his comfortable office, he dove into the field, improved technology, boosted production, and helped the factory recover. Not stopping there, he took a risk by borrowing 8.2 million yuan, about $1.2 million, to invest in large-scale plastic manufacturing, a bold decision many considered crazy at the time. But within just 5 years, he had transformed the plastic factory into a model enterprise in the region. From a young civil servant who left his job to start a business, he proved his capability, talent, and courage, becoming a prominent name in the business world. At this point, Yanbin had achieved great success through his own efforts. For most people, this would have been enough, but he wasn't satisfied with the status quo. Lacking formal education, he enrolled in school at middle age to gain the knowledge he was missing. When opportunities weren't available, he created them. However, his business journey wasn't always smooth sailing, and fortune didn't always favor him. Soon after, he faced his first major challenge. When his business started becoming profitable, he wanted to expand and grow larger. So he went to Shenzhen to develop his business and planned to collaborate with a Hong Kong businesswoman. But due to some contract loopholes, Yanbin not only failed in his business venture, but also lost 20 million yuan, about $3 million, to fraud. This failure not only rendered Yanbin's efforts futile, leaving him bankrupt overnight, but also cost him his first marriage. It was during this lowest point in his life that Xiaolan came to his side. By then, Xiaolan had become a senior official in Shenyang. Upon learning of his situation as a friend, she immediately quit her stable government job to stand by Yanbin and help him through his difficulties. This gesture deeply moved Yanbin and provided him much-needed comfort. After 2 years of recovery, Yanbin regained his spirit. When he learned about a state-owned enterprise that needed restructuring and was up for sale due to years of losses, he thought of his previous experience. Perhaps he could use his similar experience to take another chance. With this in mind, Yanbin decided to buy the factory. However, despite having this intention, where would the money come from? He didn't have that kind of capability at the time. Xiaolan, who had witnessed everything, decided to help him. She borrowed over 10 million yuan, about $1.5 million, from the bank to help Yanbin purchase the factory. In 1998, his pharmaceutical company was established. Xiaolan's series of actions finally touched Yanbin's heart. The two worked side by side in their career, and in their personal lives, They decided to take the next step and create a family. They weren't just a model couple in the business world, but also life partners. Their love story became a beautiful tale at the time. Before forming their family, Yanbin had 2 daughters from his first marriage. Xiaolin also brought her son from her first marriage. The two brought their children together to form a new family, a newly combined family of 5. They enjoyed family life while developing their increasingly prosperous business. While their business was thriving, their already complex family situation became increasingly complicated over time. Gradually, their family relationships began to show signs of conflict and numerous issues arose. Xiaolan realized things couldn't continue this way. She wondered if all these problems stemmed from their lack of having a child together. So, to save their marriage, in 2008 at age 49, Xiaolan took the risk of having a child at an advanced age and gave birth to Yanbin's son, named Guan Tongjun. They had hoped Tongjun's birth would bring some peace to their conflict-ridden blended family, but having the youngest son ultimately only treated the symptoms, not the root cause. The tensions in this midlife marriage continued to simmer. Subsequently, Xiaolan decided to give up her business role at the company to focus on family care. Seeing her husband struggling with work, she found him a secretary, hoping this person could help him handle difficulties and support his career. Unfortunately, Yanbin betrayed his wife's good intentions by having an affair with the very secretary Xiaolan had recommended. When Xiaolan discovered this, she was devastated. She realized they truly weren't compatible and decided she must divorce this unfaithful man. After his affair was exposed, Yanbin refused her request for divorce, wanting instead to save their crumbling family. He wrote a letter of remorse by hand to show his attitude and sincerity. He also declared that if his wife insisted on divorce, half of his assets would go to Xiaolan, and he would be responsible for child support. He hoped to use this sincerity to save his family and win back his wife's heart. Finally, he achieved his goal. Xiaolan forgave him under his sweet words. She thought her compromise could help the family return to normal, but reality would mock her illusions of a good life. 3 years later, Xiaolan discovered an unacceptable truth. Yanbin's secretary had given birth to his twins, a boy and a girl. This truth struck like lightning, completely awakening Xiaolan from her beautiful dream about Yanbin. This already complex family became even more complicated under Yanbin's outrageous behavior. His 6 children had 3 different mothers. The tangled relationships interweaving in this family finally became too much for this once hopeful woman to bear. She again proposed divorce, hoping to escape this nightmare. By 2016, Yanbin had amassed a fortune of 4.5 billion yuan, about $700 million, with assets spanning across rice production, real estate, and pharmaceuticals. Both of Yanbin's daughters held shares in the company. Moreover, the elder daughter had served as advertising director and assistant financial director, later becoming CEO of 2 important branch companies. The second daughter, at just age 20, had joined the company as deputy advertising director and general manager of the Market Management Center, managing market operations and brand development at a young age. Both daughters were groomed for leadership positions under their father's guidance, developing substantial capabilities. Meanwhile, Xiaolan's son, although holding shares in several real estate companies directly controlled by Yanbin, was essentially a figurehead. While the 2 sisters were being prepared as successors, Xiaolan's son wasn't even given a position in the company. This was likely one of the major sources of conflict between the couple. Regardless, Yanbin's affair and the divorce became inevitable. After enduring so much, Xiaolan finally resolved to divorce Yanbin that July, reaching a settlement agreement. Everything seemed to end there, with both parties going their separate ways. But what happened next that led to the bloody incident? Yanbin later published a book, which detailed the causes and effects of the company's founding, and also wrote about his contributions to the company's development, but did not mention Xiaolan's contributions in the early stages of co-construction. When Xiaolan read this book, she was deeply dissatisfied with its content. In her view, the book failed to accurately reflect her contributions to the company's development. This became another flashpoint for conflict between them. In December 2018, Xiaolan returned from the United States with their 10-year-old son. Yanbin came to Xiaolan's parents' house to visit his son, whom he hadn't seen for a long time. When the former couple met after more than a year apart, they faced each other like enemies, filled with hatred. At this point, Xiaolan raised an issue that had been bothering her: Yanbin's remarriage plans. If Yanbin married his young secretary after their divorce, the secretary would certainly receive far more assets than Xiaolan had. Xiaolan felt she had received too little in the divorce settlement. Yanbin responded that since they were divorced, she shouldn't interfere with his personal life, and the asset division had already been agreed upon, so there was no need to revisit it. Before one issue was resolved, Xiaolan brought up another, the book The Great Song of the Medicine Vessel. She said the book failed to acknowledge her role in the business. She threatened to write her own book about her 20 years of experience, explicitly naming Yanbin and his mistress secretary. This was perhaps the final straw for Yanbin. If scandals about a listed company's CEO were exposed, it would be far from glorious. Their argument escalated rapidly. In a fit of rage, Yanbin ran to the kitchen, grabbed a vegetable knife, and struck Xiaolan 4 times. Everyone present was frozen in terror. Xiaolan's brother was the first to react, rushing forward to wrest the knife away. Xiaolan was severely injured in the attack. She suffered shock from blood loss and facial paralysis from trauma. Fortunately, thanks to prompt emergency treatment, she survived. On December 29th, the Docking Police Department placed Yanbin under residential surveillance on suspicion of attempted murder. However, thanks to forgiveness from Xiaolan's son, the surveillance was replaced with bail pending trial. On January 24, 2019, Yanbin was detained and formally arrested a week later. In June of that year, the Ranghulu District Prosecutor's Office in Docking officially charged Yanbin with attempted murder. After calming down, Yanbin began seeking a way out. He underwent 2 psychiatric evaluations. The second evaluation showed he was suffering from depression when the incident occurred. Based on this, his defense lawyer argued that Yanbin had a mental illness and limited criminal responsibility. Additionally, he had turned himself in, so they hoped for a lenient sentence. However, the trial court rejected these arguments. He appealed, but on July 17, 2020, the Ranghulu District People's Court in Docking delivered its verdict, sentencing Yanbin to 11 years in prison for attempted murder. He won't be free until 2031. Before his detention, Yanbin had rushed to install his 2 daughters in leadership positions at the company. Today, Yanbin's pharmaceutical company has grown into a major national enterprise. Thus concluded a domestic violence case that shocked the nation. Reflecting on all the causes, one can't help but sigh. A once admired family ultimately ended in such a bloody tragedy. And that's today's case. What do you think about it? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.